Hello everybody. In this video we're going to cover more on validation. In the previous video we looked at styling our user interface based on whether something was valid or invalid, whether it had been dirty or pristine, touched, untouched, all those kinds of different scenarios. And then we added a little bit of validation, such as specifying required of these fields. Now what I want to cover in this video is I want to cover validation messages that you can set up for these specific fields, and I want to look at one way to do it, which is kind of like an inline way to do it, and then I want to look at a better way to do it, which is basically handling validation in code. So let's get started on this. So just for the first example where I'm talking inline, I'm going to just attach it to the first name field. I'm not going to do all of them. I will however, do all of them in the code behind. So let's just write a validation message for this first particular box, all right? So I'm going to come over to my code, and I'm going to come down to where the end of the first name is. So underneath the input, I'm going to create a div tag, and I'm going to put an ng-if on here, ng-if, and then go equals, we're going to go first name dot dirty and first name dot invalid. We're going to show something inside of this here, alright? Now I just need to have a quick look at the markup for Bootstrap. Where's an example of it? So what we need to do is we need to specify a class on here of alert, and then alert danger, alert dash danger, like so. And inside of here we're going to put because we're just doing required, I'll just put first name is required, like so. And we're going to save that, and we'll let the system compile it, reload the page. Now if I come in here and I do this, then I move away, well, strangely enough, nothing is working. Why that's not working, I'm not sure. Let's have a look at this. And there's an error. Cannot read property dirty of undefined. What have I done wrong? Oh, first name. Not bad. So let's make sure all the errors go away. And we go back to the page. Oh, I should have checked now. Let's make sure the errors are gone. And they have. At least they appear to. And I put in Daryl, and I go away, and now we get a little pop up there that says first name is required. Alright? And we see this a lot. Obviously the styling I'm just going to put like that for the moment, but we see this a lot in our forms. We've got an error, and then we display a message underneath it. That's all great. We put that all in line, and those may never change. However, what if we wanted to do something like set up our validation messages from a screen and backend somewhere? So say for this page, I can go and set up what the validation messages would be for required, what the validation messages would be for min-max, regular expression ones, that kind of stuff. What if we want a little bit more control, right? We don't want to just have it hard coded into our code. Well, then obviously we're going to come over here, we can't do this anymore, right? And the other thing I don't like about our code is that we've got all these conditional logic contained within our markup, right? Now this is something that's very, very normal in Angular 1. You'll see this quite frequently, things being bound to attributes with expressions like this, especially on forms. And Angular 2 wants to take a separate route to this. They want to start putting this inside of components. And why do they want to put it inside of components? Well, it's basically for testing purposes. So we can test, under what circumstances, if we pass a view model in, that we're going to get a required validation, that kind of thing. So that's what we're going to focus on here. So the first thing I want to do is I'm actually going to take what is normally part of this danger class, CSS, and I'm going to actually implement it on the ng-invalid, if that makes any sense. So instead of having to concern ourselves with conditional logic here and checking to see if it's invalid all the time, I just want to hook straight into the ng-invalid. And the reason for that is it will simplify our markup here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go into the CSS, right? And essentially, ahead of time, what I've done is I've looked at how Bootstrap does its error boxes and its little error crosses. And I'm going to implement that here so that we can have that same behavior, right? So to do that, what I've got is a little snippet here. So, or not a little snippet, I'll just type it. So we've got dash fun, $fun group like that. So anything that's inside of a fun group that is ng-invalid and is ng-dirty, so it's been typed, we're going to do some stuff, right? This is the condition we want to take it. First thing we're going to change is the border color, right? And we're going to set it to, this is what Bootstrap has it set to, DB, is it DB 534F, right? So it's like a palish ready color. And then we're going to have padding right of 2.25 rem. I don't know if I've explained rems before, I believe I have. We're going to have a background is set to some very long string, which I'm going to copy from my Git repository in a minute because it's too hard to remember here, but it'll go inside a URL tag. And then we have a background repeat, and we're going to set that to no repeat. And finally a background position, because if you look at where the axes go, they're on the far right here. Background position, and we're going to have it set to center right. But not only that, we want it to come 0.635 rem in from the right. I believe that's what that's saying. So let me just quickly grab the URL for the background here. So I'm going to go up to my GitHub. And the other thing is too, if you guys are following along, this is currently tutorial 13. So if you've got tutorial 12, if you pull that down, you'll have currently the code I have before I started working on this. So you should be able to follow along. So if you want, you need to pause, download, come back, maybe rewind a little bit, and get up to this point. You can do that right now. Okay, cool. So hopefully you're back now, and you're with me. Now quickly I'm just going to grab inside of my tutorial 13 branch, which I've done ahead of time. I'm going to go inside of source, obviously, app. I'm going to go to, where are we? Players, registration component CSS. And I'm going to grab this big long string here, like so, and paste that into my code. So coming back over, and silly me, shouldn't have added the double quotes in, like so. Save that. And what I'm going to also do, just to try this out, is I'm going to remove this line here. So it's now back to form group. I remove this line. I'm going to remove this stuff. I don't see a real point at this point to show green if it's successful, and we could, but for my example, I'm just going to leave the green out. So if I come back over to my code now, and I refresh, just to be safe, and I come in and I go, hello, Obviously it's still blue. If I come in here, you'll see you get the same pattern as before, right? But now we're using the ng-invalid to implement the red border here and the red X, you know, and a few other little bits and pieces. And we still get the error message, right? So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video, and what I want you guys to do is I want you to do what I've done here. I want you to go through all of the following controls and undo all this stuff, okay? And then once you undo all this stuff, we'll get back to the video. Okay, see you in a moment. And we're back. So if you've done what I've done, basically I've eliminated all the classes that were part of the divs that were associated with form group, and I also removed any classes that were associated with each input, because to be frank, we don't really need them anymore, because we added some CSS to the input, and we're not really going to have much outside of it. And as you can see, if I come in now and I just type in D and then remove it, we still get the same behavior. Same here. If I go J and then quickly remove it, we've got the same behavior. Obviously these other ones don't have messages yet. That's because I have better plans for messages than what I already have for the first one. Right, so you can see they all fail. I'll undo that. You know, you're getting all the errors, all of what you expect, and the very last form field here, obviously I can't click it because everything's valid. Right? So I ain't not much to learn here, other than we've got a message here so far, and that we've removed some of the Bootstrap logic and we've used our own CSS to emulate that. Other than that, it's all the same. So with the messages, what I really want to do is I don't want to put them in here, right? We still need something here to display something when we're ready, but I don't want to have this message here hard-coded, nor do I want to have this kind of logic, you know, intense logic inside of my form, right? I want to be able to put that inside some server-side code, and then what we show here is just a list of messages, right, for that particular field, which in this case happens to be the first name field. Now, the other thing we don't need either, if we're not going to be referencing the dirty and invalid properties like we are here. And in fact, I'm just going to set this to true for the moment, even though technically it's not going to be true. If we're not referring to the first name of the form or last name of the form directly in this code, we also don't need these template IDs, so we can actually delete these. Now I'm not going to pause the video for this because it's not going to take very long. That's so. These template IDs were to describe the form inputs on this particular page, so that we could say, oh yeah, I understand it's pointing to this field, you know. And some of these had IDs, some of them don't. The ones who need form field validation binding have the hash on them. There's another one. Another one. Yeah, another one. And another one. Position. I think this one literally just has required written on it, which is fine for now. Oh, we do have the hash position. We don't need this anymore. So we need to take that off all the radio buttons here. So this pattern I'm about to show allows us to write the bulk of our validation in the, or at least the first part of it, which is the validation messages. Allows us to write it in the app component itself rather than in the actual HTML, because we want the HTML to be as clean as possible. You know, we don't want to have all these different attributes all the time. So if we can limit that, then we should, right? So looking at the injury one, that one's fine. Yeah, password not necessary. So scrolling back to the top, we can see we've got a first name, we've got a normal input field with a binding to the view model. Right, inside of the TS file, nothing's changed so far, everything should work the same. The only thing that won't work is validation, and that's because I haven't bound anything to the messages yet. But in fact, validation will work because I've bound it to true at the moment. But we need to set to something else. So what people do in these circumstances is they start to build dynamic messages through either a service or in the component themselves, right? Now for this demonstration, I'm just going to show the validation in the component, and it's only for simplicity reasons, but technically you could move it into a service and you could pull it out of a back-end database or something like that from somewhere, or some API can present those error messages for you for the particular page you're working on. To me, it doesn't really matter where it's set at this point, but I think, you know, in the long run, it should be in a service. That's just my true belief. Even if it's just basically mocking it up, or just leaving the static information in there, it's not actually dynamic validation at all, which, you know, some companies are like that. They don't want to build dynamic validation, they just want to use the built-in, you know, declarative one. I personally like it when we don't have any logic inside of markup. That's just my personal preference. So let's get started on making these validation rules, you know, for these fields. So we know for a fact that things are required, right? And for the purpose of UI specific stuff, we kind of have to keep that there, right? If that makes any sense. Maybe it doesn't at this point, and that's fine. So what we need to do now is we need to go to the back end. So I'm going to open up the component, and we've got ourselves a couple of lookup services, injury field list, that's all good. The view model will stay as is, that's okay. But what we need to do now is we need to declare something called form errors, right? So it's like an array, or it's an array of objects, I guess, is what it's called. Just trying to think. Hang on one moment, I'm gonna have a call. And we're back. Sorry guys, just had another important call there. So where were we? We were basically looking at validation in the back end, weren't we? So what I want to try and achieve with this particular form now is I want to get rid of, inside of this registration form, I want to get rid of code where it was referencing the if something and if dirty and valid show this message. I want to get rid of this hard-coded message from the HTML itself. I want this to be displayed, right, as if it's dynamic information. Okay, if that makes any sense. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is I'm going to come down to the bottom of the component, because I generally like to put private fields at the bottom. We have a private method there, and in fact, because I like to leave private methods altogether, I'll stick it underneath this method here, this one. You don't have to do that, guys, if you don't want. I just do it for preference. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable here. Now, I could do it at the top, you know, but I think sometimes it's easier to see some stuff at the bottom. So I'm going to create a variable called private errors, form errors, right? And these will basically be the placeholder for the form errors, right, for each individual field. So what we're going to do is we're going to create it as an object, like so, and we're going to have a number of properties on it, and the properties will essentially be the name of the fields that we have in our form. So the first field we have is called first name, right, and the value at the moment, because we have no errors, it's going to be an empty string. And we're going to do this for all the properties that we see on the form. So we've got first name, we've got last name, we've got email, we don't have any validation on biography, so it's going to be date of birth next. And then we're going to go to team ID, because we're looking at the team drop down, and that's required. And then after that, we're looking at the height in feet. Height in feet. Now, I would recommend to you guys that the name of these should be matched to the name of the form elements. And you'll see why in a few minutes when I actually write the glue code to join the errors and the fields together. It's easier if they're both named the same. So the next one is going to be height in inches. And next one will be weight. I should paste weight like so. And the very last one, or no, the second last one here, sorry, position. So, and finally, password. Alright, so these variables will be used eventually to store errors. Now, before we actually work out how all this evolves, what I'm going to do is I'm now going to take this particular variable, go back to my markup, and I'm going to put if form errors dot first name, like so. So in other words, we have a value inside of the first name. Then we're going to have the class alert danger. And then inside of here, instead of having that, we're going to now go form errors dot first name. Okay? So what I'm going to do now is, again, I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to go and update all the other fields that have required set to them, and I'm going to add this same logic. And I want you guys to do the same, because I think it's starting to become good practice if you do that. So I'm going to pause the video. I'll be back in a moment. And I'm back. So as you can see, I've actually brought all those inputs back up to just a couple of lines. You know, it looks, and then I can now see a group. And I've added this ng-if for all the fields for this particular form, so you can see it on the last name, you can see it on email. Biography doesn't have one, but that's because we're not validating anything. The date of birth does, right? So date of birth has got information there. Team, it's also got an ID, so it also has an if condition. So you can see going down the page, they're all kind of the same, right? And they're all the same. They're all extracting from this form errors object and then looking for the weight message. You know, and even like there's a form errors height in inches property. So whenever there's an error inside of the height in inches, which is, let's see, this stuff here, or this field above me, this will pop up with whatever error it is. You know, so that's kind of where we're at in terms of the HTML. Now what we want to do is we actually want to go on the back end and we actually want to build this out. So we already have the form errors property, which we've implemented into the front end, and that's all good. Now what we want to do is we want to actually define the error messages, don't we? So to do that, we're going to have another variable for the moment. And this is only because I'm storing this information inside of the component. So validate messages equals, and then we've got another object. Now, I'm grouping these by name, and these names have to match what is in the form errors object. So first name is inside the form errors object. And then for first name, we can specify another object. And that object defines a number of properties which represent validation on your field. So we've got required, and when it's required, we're going to set first name is required, right? And we go through and we do this pretty much for all the other fields too, because we're using required field attributes for all of them. So just copy and paste a little bit. And I'll set this one to last name, this one to last name. And this one to last name. and then email. And this would be email. What? Sorry, somebody was just talking to me in the distance. It's all good. Okay, back to what I'm doing. Email, and now the email. What do we got? We've got date of birth, because we're not doing biography. Team ID, and we've got height in feet. Height in feet. And height in inches. And we'll quickly go and update the messages here. DOB, let's do it like that. Team, we'll just say team is required because it's really just a team. Height in feet. Height in inches. And we got weight, position, and password. This should do it. So weight. Oops, spelled that completely wrong. GH2. It has it required as well. In fact, I'm gonna be picky here and do this. Height, weight in pounds required. And finally, I believe the height, weight. We'll go position. Forgot about position. Right. And finally, password. Now, this is very simple at this stage. I'm not doing any regex or looking up passwords or anything like that. I'm doing password complexity. For this particular one, we're just going to set required. And we'll go password is required. Right. So that's the messages for validation when required is set on that particular thing. And these are the fields that have required set on them at the moment. So now that I have those, we need to wire up these messages with these form errors, right? So basically, whenever first name fails, it has to extract the validation message from here and display it on the screen, right? Makes sense? Good. So, how are we going to go about doing that? There's actually a number of ways you can do it. And the simplest way that I can think of is we're going to subscribe to something called the ng-after-view-checked event. It's basically done towards the end of loading a component. And it's basically after most of the view elements have, or all the view elements have been loaded, right? So let's tie into that event. So I've got ng on the end. I'm going to put here ng after view checked like that. Right, you know what's the point of all that? Well, what I want to do is now I need to verify, you know, when the view changes in some way, and the view's been checked. I want to verify that something is tried to be changed or has been changed, and whether that's a valid change or not. You know, whether that's given a dirty state and an invalid state or not. And if it has, then we need to ensure that we're displaying the right errors, right, to the user. So this is what we're going to do. So the first line, well, first thing we're going to do, we're going to go this dot form change like so. right? So we want it to come from a private method. I come down to, I'll grab from directly, oh no, the first private, right? Private form changed, right? So now we're covering a situation where the form has changed. Why is it not working up here? What do you call that? Property form change does not read. It's not meant to exist on anything. Form changed is form changed. Oh, changed. Sorry. It's capital D. My bad. So with this, what we need to do now, we have a view model, but what we're actually going to be assessing against all these validation issues, it's actually against the form itself, right? It's not the actual view model. The view model will just dictate whether there's data in there or not, and update it based on, dual binding, right, or one-way binding, depending on how it's set up. So what I'm going to do here is we need to add a child component. You want to say, well, what now? You can actually create children inside of Angular 2 using something called @viewChild. It's not you actually creating it, you're actually wiring it up so that you can make modifications to it. So in this case, I'm just going to be calling my registration form like so. So I want to tap into the events or to the values of the registration form that I'm using in this particular component. That's what I'm saying right here. And that is a particular type of form, right? So I'm going to go registration form, which you think is massively important, equals, and sorry, not equals, but it's the type of ng form, right? Does that make sense? Now, ng form comes from the forms module, which doesn't happen to be included here. So I'm going to go up here, I'm going to import ng form, ng form from @angular/forms, like so. And we also need to get the view child from core. So view child like so. Okay, so we've established now that we're wiring up our registration form to be a ng form field on this component, right? So we can do stuff with it now. We can add fields, we can drop fields, we can highlight fields, we can highlight ourselves, we can make ourselves disappear. All that stuff can be handled with ng form now, right? Totally fine. All that stuff is all good. Now I want to come back down. I've got all the errors. I've got all the form errors ready to go. So on form change, right? You might say, "Oh, this sounds fairly pleasant." It's really not, right? So the logic is if this dot registration form, right? So in other words, if this is something like this, the registration form is either template is something, which it should be a form. We're going to wire in, right? So once we know it's a form, we're going to wire into when anything on the form, its value changes. And why do we want to do that? Well, we want to confirm that, if there's an error on that field for whatever reason, we need to show it. Or you can do other things like add conditional logic based on choices. So if this was if the form was able to pull down what the drop down option is, right, that kind of thing, then it will alert, we can change the UI based on that and all that other stuff, right? We can do things a little bit more dynamic. But for this exercise, I'm going to be utilizing this just to get the validation messages out onto the screen. Okay? So to do that, we're now going to have to subscribe to the value changes event. So we go this dot registration form dot value changes, right? Value changes, and we're going to subscribe to it. So I'm hoping some people here will subscribe to this. I'm not going to be passing my star, so I'm going to be on this dot on value changed and pass in that data which we already have. Now we still haven't created the on value change method yet, so let's do that now. So we're going to private on value changed, passing in a data. I'm not sure what type of element it is at this point, or object. I think it's just, well, in this case I think we can just specify any because we don't know. Does it have to return anything? No, it does not. No, it does not. Okay, sorry, another call, guys. 1 moment. Sorry, I'm back again. So I just realized here I was missing a H. So that's now back in play. So what we've done so far, since the last time I stopped this video for the third time, really sorry about that. We've got this new event handler, which is ng after view checked, which basically waits for the view to load and then checks everything. We've got this method called form changed, and what this does is it wires up an event, or when the value changes, anything changes, we're going to subscribe to an event called on value changed, and if we've got some data, we'll pass that through. And now what does this do? This on value changed, this is the key to this particular video. This is the part where we're going to be quite clever in what we're doing, and this is the part where we're going to wire up all the form errors to the fields. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, first thing we need to do is, at the moment we're using ng-form. So again, what I'm going to do is verify that the registration form is in fact something, just to be safe. And if it is something, we're going to pick out the form that's inside of this ng form. Now, hard to explain what that is, but basically, in the ng form, it does more than just have a form in it. It has other properties, but the form itself, it's like getting the controls from the underlying form, if that makes any sense. So what we need to do is go const form equals this dot registration form dot form, right? Form, like so, right? And this is what is referred to as a form group, okay? And in the next video, we're going to see more about how form groups work when we look at reactive forms. But basically, that's what we're getting into here. We're getting into the actual form details itself, right? What's currently there, because we've registered it already. So now that we've got access to the form, what we can actually get access to now is the fields on the form, right? But before we do that, we basically want to iterate over the error messages that might already exist at this point and make sure that they're emptied. And then we're going to grab the field that's associated with each field error property, form error property, right? And I'll show you what I mean by that. So the first thing we're going to do is we go for another constant field, right, in this dot form errors. So we're going through that form errors object. So this is for each property field in this dot form errors. So if you don't know anything about JavaScript, this is not the right construct in JavaScript. This is the TypeScript way. But in JavaScript, you can actually iterate over each property that's in an object by using a for in statement. So for field value in an object, If you can quickly look that up, but it's the same construct as what we're doing here. So we're going through each field that's in, or each method or property, say property in this case, that's in this particular object. We're going to do something with it, right? So the one thing we're going to do first is we're going to ensure that the value of that field is empty. Right? We're going to empty it out. We don't want any errors to show up at this point because we were just about to reevaluate the errors, and that's what this whole ng after view check is all about. You know, you can tie into your validation at this point and recheck every time something's changed, right? Every time the view changes, and the view changes if you change input. You know, and that's kind of what's happening here. So every time we change something on the form, this is going to get fired. So we're going through each field and we're emptying out the errors, right? So that's the first step. Then what we want to do is we actually want to grab the control, right? So we're going to grab a control that matches this field, because remember, we want, we said that we want the form controls to match the names in the form errors. And remember I said there's a good reason for that. Well, this is it right here, okay? It's basically to fetch the control that matches a particular form error. If they had two different names, we wouldn't have been able to easily do that here. So const control equals, right, form dot get, right? So we're getting something, form dot get by the field error, the field name, which is from form errors. So we've got ourselves a control. Now we're just going to go if, and we'll just make sure control has a value, right? Not constrol. Control has a value, and right, the control has been entered into, so it's in fact somebody's typed something into it, and the control is actually invalid, right? So in other words, since the change, the control's now in an invalid state, right? We're going to do something. What are we going to do here? Well, we want to show messages, don't we? We want to show messages in the HTML page, which means we have to update the form errors collection based on this field, this particular field we're on, based on what is in the validation messages, right? So we're going to start looking for this now. We're going to start. So just say we're on first name. First name happened to be invalid for whatever reason. We're going to confirm to see if one of the errors was because it was required. And if it is required, we're going to grab this message. Okay? And that's what we're going to do right now. So we've gotten to this point. We now want to go and grab the messages for this. So this dot validation messages and the field. So this goes and gets all the messages that are associated with this field, even the required ones. So if there's more than required, then we get them all at this point. And then we're going to go through all the errors that's associated with this control and match them up against the messages, right? So how do we do that? Well, we do another for loop, right? So for const key, so we've got a key in control.errors. Now control.errors is basically the errors that Angular has created as a result of looking at your control, looking at what the input of that control is, and determining if there's actually an invalid state. And then it lists all the errors inside of this errors collection for the control, or the errors object, I should say. In this case, it's going to be an object of errors, right? Or just error names. It would be error names actually. It won't be error messages. It'll be just like required, min length, max length, regular expression, whatever they all are. I don't know what they all are, but that'll be recordings of this control.errors, right? The type of errors. So we're going to match them up now. So we know we've got a messages object, which specifies down here the type of error and then the message. So we're going to match this key up. Alright, so now we're going to go if or we're going to go this, right, dot form errors, and because we've got the key from the errors, right, we're just going to plug that in here if it exists, right? So if it doesn't exist, it's not really going to matter. It's just not going to show anything. And then plus equals, right, and then we're going to try and extract the messages out of here. Messages key, like so, and then plus a space like that. Okay, because there's going to be potentially more than one particular error. In fact, I've typed this wrong. This is field, sorry. Field, my bad. Because we're going to the field, we're going to the name field, and then we're grabbing the error message that's matching the key that's in this errors list. I hope that makes sense. And I think that's it. I think that's it for this. Oh, wait, just making sure I've got everything loaded up the top here. I believe I have. Well, let's give it a try, and hopefully it works. Hopefully I got this right the first time. I don't have to go in and fix stuff. And so, if we did this right, what should happen is we should get validation messages that are programmatically coming in. So if I now come in here and I go F and then I go back, first name is required. So we go back to our HTML and we see here at the top, we don't have that message hard-coded anymore. That's come from the form errors collection. So we go to the next one and we go D and remove it. Last name is required. Email is required. Biography doesn't have anything. We're going to come in here and just quickly wind this up. Alright. Remove something. Date of birth is required. Team, please select. Team is required. And so on and so forth, right? So it looks like we've got it working, which is great. Alright, this is exactly what we wanted. Weight in pounds is required. And we could format these things a little better, but you get the gist of what's going on here. Alright, and last one, password, weight in pounds is required. Okay, so we've made a mistake at the bottom. That's okay. I think that is simply because if I go down to the bottom of my HTML, I've got the word weight here instead of password. See, not perfect. I was close, nearly got it right the first time. The compile, we'll just quickly check the password again. And there you go. Password is required. It's on the submit button, so that's not a good thing. So let's bring that back up. So we'll just put that back under here. I want to make sure I get this right before I submit this. And lastly, and that's better. Okay. And that's what I wanted to achieve in this video. Basically, I wanted to show you guys how to basically take a lot of the validation logic and just basic logic overall out of your markup, right, to reduce the amount of code that we have to look through in our markup, because I'm not a huge fan of logic inside of markup. Things like this are okay, things like this are okay, but when you have things like if dirty and this, or you know, you get the picture. You know, to try and get that stuff out of there is fantastic. And now, for the most part, this looks like markup. You know, we can kind of read what's going on. Email and input, and then we've got some kind of a div that's displaying some information like that. You know, even if you don't understand this, you know it's displaying some text. And there's ngIf. Well, if you know Angular well enough, you should know that ngIf is saying if this happens to be true, or this has a value essentially. So if I set a value to email, then it's gonna pop up. Okay, that's essentially what's happening here. So thank you everybody for listening in this video. I'm really sorry for all the pauses I did. I didn't really want to do that, but you know, life is life. So I hope you guys have learned a lot in this video. I think we've achieved a lot. And in the next video, we're going to cover reactive forms, which is the next evolutionary step in forms. And then potentially after that, I'll look at dynamic forms, which is basically the ultimate way of building forms when you don't necessarily know what kind of data you're going to be pulling back from, like a database or something like that. So thank you everybody for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.